Hello, I'm Aaron Hill from the Miami University Alumni Association, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the session of Winter College 2021. For more than 17 years, Winter College has been the Alumni Association's premier alumni education event. We are so excited to be able to bring to a larger audience in our virtual format this year. We've had an exciting lineup over these past 2 days, and you can navigate the full schedule by clicking Events by Type on this website's toolbar and selecting Winter College 2021 from the drop-down menu. Feel free to join programs even while they are in progress. And if you can't make it to all of them, sessions will be recorded and posted online for you. So our session today is titled Secrets of Gentelligent Teams, presented by Dr. Megan Gerhardt, Josephine Nachemson-Ekwall, and Brandon Fogel. Dr. Gerhardt, PhD, is a professor of management, director of leadership development, and Robert D. Johnson, co-director of the Isaac and Oxley Center for Business Leadership at the Farmer School of Business. Her upcoming book, Gentelligence, The Revolutionary Approach to Leading an Intergenerational Workforce, is co-authored by Miami alumni Josephine Nachemson-Ekwall, class of 2018, and Brandon Fogel, class of 2018 as well, and will be released by Rowan Littlefield in June. Megan's academic research has been published widely on individual differences, motivation, leadership, and generational differences in the workplace. And her work on Gentelligence has also been featured on NBCnews.com, The Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune magazine, the San Francisco Chronicle, Market Watch, Business Insider, and the Houston Chronicle, among others. In 2017, her TEDx talk, Why I Love Millennials and You Should Too, was released, kicking off the Gentelligence movement. Josephine Nachemson-Ekwall is an Associate Director of Financial Crime Prevention Policy and Procedures at UBS, focusing on implementation and adherence to policies, local requirements, and global standards. Josephine's work in leadership development focuses on strengths-based development, individual coaching, and the importance of personal mission and values in driving one's life and career. She most recently gave a presentation at the Clifton Strength Summit on why strengths work and published an article on generational conflict and tension in December 2019. She is the co-author of the upcoming book, Gentelligence, The Revolutionary Approach to Leading an Intergenerational Workforce. And finally, we have Brandon Fogel. He's a senior staff consultant at Ernst & Young, LLC, in the People Advisory Services practice, which specializes in organizational change and people management. Brandon's work in leadership development focuses on strengths-based development, effective teaming strategies, and the value of goal setting. He is the co-author of the upcoming book, Gentelligence, The Revolutionary Approach to Leading an Intergenerational Workforce. Okay, that note, let's get started. And remember that you can submit questions or comments during the sessions, and we will review most of those after the presentation.
Hello, and thank you, Aaron, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. We're excited to be with you today. We're going to share some key insights about how to navigate the challenges and opportunities of working with a multi-generational team. So as Aaron mentioned, as evidence that we practice what we preach, I have my co-authors with me today. I'm a member of Gen X. They're members of the millennial generation, as well as former students of mine. So we thought the audience for Winter College would appreciate that. And we're all excited to be with you here today to share some highlights about the work we've been doing together over the last year or so. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides, and the three of us are going to take you through some of the things that we've learned in terms of best practices on leading multi-generational teams in the workforce. So interestingly, while multi-generational teams are a reality in our workplaces today, only 6% of organizations agree that they're ready for this challenge. And that's a startlingly low number. And the fact that generational diversity is going to be a reality for the foreseeable future, this is not an issue that's going away. Our work really focuses on how we can view this issue as an opportunity rather than as a challenge. So generational and age diversity have the potential to bring great value to a team. But the paradox is they can very easily, if not managed well, do the opposite. They can be a source of frustration, a source of challenge. And so it takes some intentional strategy and some insight in order to recognize and realize the benefits that are inherent in this kind of diversity of thought. It doesn't just happen naturally. So we often wonder with, multiple generations in the workplace today, whether those kinds of differences really can be overcome and whether multi-generational teams might be more trouble than they're worth sometimes. But today we're going to discuss how a Gentelligent strategy can actually help reverse this dynamic and instead allow teams to realize the benefits that are sometimes hidden in a multi-generational workforce. So just as a quick primer, I know some of you joined us this last summer during Alumni Weekend for our overall Gentelligence presentation. So we're excited that some of you came back to hear us again today. Our content and our lessons are a little bit different, but we did want to make sure to do a quick primer on the 5 generations that are currently in the workforce in the US today. So you can take a look there and identify, place yourself, make sure you're aware of which generation you belong to based on these particular years. So we take our generational years from the Pew Research Center, which is a neutral think tank. But you can also maybe think about the people that you work with currently in teams that you're in and where maybe they might fall. So you can see that we have these 5 different generations. And we want to emphasize, just for our purposes today, that there's a narrative and a story that goes along with each of these generations. And we talk about that substantially in the book. There's an entire chapter on it, and we did talk about that over Alumni Weekend. But for today, what we want to remind people is that growing up in a common period of time allows people to have similar formative experiences. Things that happen in the world, things that happen politically, culturally, socially, that do influence how people see the world, their values, their opportunities, as well as their behaviors in the workplace. So generational differences aren't everything, and we want to be careful not to stereotype people, but generational identity is one layer of who we are and can very much affect our perspectives. So often the challenges and the conflict that come from being in a multi-generational team stem from the fact that maybe we don't understand that the perspectives other people on our team are using to view the work or to view the interactions differ from ours. And maybe we end up having some miscommunication or a lack of awareness of those kinds of differences. So with so many generations working together today, we think it's likely that you've probably experienced some degree of challenge that can occur when you're working with people who are either older or younger than you are. So I want to talk briefly about some of the challenges that we've identified being common in multi-generational teams. And I won't go into depth in all of them just in the interest of time. But I do want to talk a little bit about how these might appear. And as we go through them, think a little bit about how this kind of challenge might potentially have shown up for you. So the first one I want to talk about is the idea of the power struggle. So too often, age differences in a team result in sort of a jockeying for dominance or for clout. Younger generations may want to increase their visibility, want to increase their impact. They want to engage in a bit of tug of war to show that, they deserve their place on that team and they have something to add. And then older generations may pull back a little bit, believing that they naturally should have the upper hand because of their years of experience. And this power struggle can create what we call the us versus them dynamic, where somehow we feel like we're competing for, that place of dominance in the team. Just a few others, the balancing of team needs. So when you have people on a team who have different levels of experience, different career stages, different learning styles, you're going to have really varying preferences and really varying situations about whether people want autonomy, whether they need direction. And as a team member, team leader, as a colleague, it's very hard to give everyone what they need while still having equity, having fairness, all of those different things together. That can be a really tough task. Some other things just to touch upon, and both Brandon and Josephine will talk a little bit about these later in our presentation, so I won't go too in depth. but things around issues of decision making. Who makes the final decision on a team? Is it the person that's been there the longest? Is it the person that has the most subject matter expertise in the task that we're tackling? And what happens if those aren't the same person? That can be a sore subject as well. And then finally, clashing communication norms, which I know Brandon's going to talk about for us, in terms of the tools, the norms that we have around communication, response times, and channels. And then finally, this idea of knowledge judgment. So we're in this really interesting period of time where we all possess different kinds of knowledge. Just as a quick example, younger people tend to have a level of tech savvy, and it sometimes it's called a stereotype, but if you grow up learning a kind of knowledge or a kind of skill just as part of your development, you do have a natural ease and ability to pick things up that other generations who had to learn those things later in life may not have. So this is often a point of contention where older generations absolutely have the ability to learn technology. We've all had to do that over the past year pretty quickly, but it's easier or may come more naturally to younger generations. And so it's not always true that the oldest person on the team knows the most. They may know the most about some specific things or have the most experience. They have organizational wisdom, but we're at a period of time, particularly with the digital age, where age does not necessarily equate with all kinds of knowledge. And that has thrown us a little bit on our head in terms of trying to recognize the value that different kinds of knowledge can bring to a team and making sure that we're acknowledging that. So I want to pause here just simply to say that the point of a team is that we're trying to bring together diversity of thought. And teams have this, what we call a paradox, where if they are managed and led and they run effectively, then together we can create a lot more than we could individually. If they're not, the frustrations and challenges make it feel like they're really not worth that investment. And so, I love this quote. I think it's worth talking about, that this is our focus with Gentelligence, is how do we tap into that potential that a multi-generational, age-diverse diversity of thought brings us. So the final thing I want to talk about, and then I'm going to turn it over to Josephine, is what is Gentelligence? So Gentelligence is a term that I came up with several years ago when I wanted to find a smarter way to narrate the conversation out there around generational differences. So historically, generational differences are treated like clickbait. We see a lot of bad headlines. We see a lot of stereotypes being used, rather than the way we know diversity needs to be looked at, which is a form of valuable difference. And so Gentelligence brings the best practices of diversity management and of cross-cultural management and the research in those fields to this area of generational and age diversity in the workforce, an area it really hasn't been applied to in the past. And so all of the work in Gentelligence is about how do we see what is usually looked at as a negative or a conflict or a source of frustration as instead a source of opportunity in the workplace. So that is what the rest of our presentation is going to be about today. How do we use the Gentelligence practices in order to overcome some of these challenges that tend to be inherent in our team? So with that, I want to turn it over to Josephine for a look at those Gentelligence practices.
Thank you, Megan. So now imagine a multi-generational team. Or think of a time when you worked with colleagues from different generations. Now also imagine what you could accomplish if you were able to leverage the value of generational diversity to actually unlock the potential of those teams. We will spend some time now to discuss how you can do that, how you can adopt the Gentelligence practices and implement what we call the team trifecta to truly take your team effectiveness to the next level. So taking a step back, just at a high level, Gentelligence is the result of achieving two broad goals. The first is to break down barriers to generational bias and tension. And the second is to build up the capacity to leverage intergenerational power and strength. The two essential practices needed to break down generational barriers are the first two columns that we see on this page. So resist assumptions and adjusting the lens. Resisting assumptions means pushing back against human tendencies to draw automatic connections based on someone's generational identity. Here, we suggest that you perform an assumption audit or a self-study throughout the day to identify where you may be making automatic connections about someone from a different generation. The second Gentelligence practice is to adjust the lens. Here, the aim is to understand why colleagues may be behaving the way that they are. It is not so much about, or is not about actually, identifying behavior or categorizing behavior as good or bad. Rather, it is about understanding and describing and interpreting that behavior, and hopefully identifying alternative evaluations for why your coworkers may be behaving the way that they are. The example here that we sometimes bring is sort of you describe the behavior. So you walk into a meeting and you see someone, or maybe you're presenting and you see someone pulling up their computer. The automatic connection that you're making is that that person may not be paying attention to you. However, if you take a step back and think about what alternative evaluations of what could be happening, it is possible that your coworker is in reality taking notes or actually writing down action items for your team to have with them when the meeting is over. So once the breaking down of barriers has been accomplished, we can instead focus on building up the capacity of leveraging intergenerational power and strength. There are two things that we need to do. The first is to strengthen trust, and the second is to expand the pie. The third intelligence principle is what we call strengthening trust. The idea here is to see the potential in depending upon and collaborating with those across the perceived generation gap by focusing on moving away from viewing your coworkers as adversaries and instead viewing them as dependable partners. To do this, we encourage all teams to focus on building psychological safety. The final and fourth intelligence principle is what we call expanding the pie. And many of you may be familiar with this term because it is a term that we borrowed from negotiation strategy. The idea here is to actually transform a situation to a win-win solution that was previously viewed as a win-lose situation. Here, we want you to acknowledge and want everyone to acknowledge that we can actually create more by working together across generations than we could on our own. The idea here is to create more pie for everyone involved. Now, I think with that overview, we want to talk a little bit about the team trifecta. So we have identified 3 key ingredients of effective teams. So what you see here, so support, significance, and structure. The trifecta really matters for all teams, regardless of age and regardless of field. And they allow teams to feel secure, team members to feel secure in their contributions, clear in their direction, and valued in the collective work that they do as a group. And I actually will hand it over to Brandon now, who will walk us through in detail what this looks like for intergenerational teams.
Thank you so much, Josephine. So like Josephine was saying, these are the 3 pieces of the trifecta for any team. But we're going to focus today specifically on how we can use those to make more Gentelligent teams. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can utilize any of the principles that Josephine just walked through to improve one of those aspects of the trifecta. The first piece I'm going to cover today is structure. So when you think of structure, you can think of governance or rules that are in place that are allowing for the Gentelligence to form within the team. The right structure is going to be built on a collective trust and a feeling of support between our team members. This tends to require that there are agreed upon guidelines that will be followed, metrics for success, norms of the behavior, etc. Things like that that help us to determine how we as a team collaborate and work together. I think we can all probably think of a time when we were on a team where the structure was not agreed by all. One example that Josephine touched on a little bit already was laptops and meetings. So sometimes we can see that there's a little bit of tension with a laptop, that some people have their own assumptions about what that means, and others are just using that laptop to take notes or something like that. The problem here is not that either of those beliefs are wrong, it's just that there was no agreed upon rule regarding laptop use. I remember in one of my classes at Miami, we did this as a class. We determined together with the professor what the right strategy was to use laptops to make sure that we were all understanding of what the rules were and the norms of that behavior. We aren't here to suggest that there's one right way to do these behaviors. It's just that it's important for us to, as a team, to individually decide what makes the most sense for the group that we're working on. It can help to avoid those annoyances that tend to form when the structure is not built in place. So today we're going to think about this structure in regards to the first two principles of Gentelligence. So that's resisting assumptions and adjusting the lens. So when we think about building a Gentelligent structure in your team, you may want to consider just the general assumptions that have been already made. One common example that Megan mentioned was decision making. Often it ends up being that those who have been in the organization longest, who tend to be some of the older members of the organization, of the team, they make the decisions due to their seniority. Are there opportunities that exist where other people within the team are able to make decisions to help change that and allow that structure to open up to more people? Another question we like to ask is, what are the communication norms? Like in the example I mentioned, it may be creating tensions that are negatively affecting the team. So if we can find a way to standardize those communication norms, that really helps. Finally, a great question to ask is, where do our generational gaps exist in the team? Gentelligence is about taking the strengths of every team member. So if we're missing a Gen Xer or a Boomer, you're losing one opportunity for a different input that could provide new ideas and new strategies for the team. So with that, we're going to move on to the second piece of the trifecta, which is support. Support in this context is about the collective trust within the team. I honestly think this is the most straightforward of the three, because I think we can all think of an example of a team that had really good trust, where everything just went really well, we worked collectively, there was no tension, everybody was doing great. Or you might only have a bad example, which I hope that's not the case. In a team with strong support, the members are trusting of each other, which means they have room to be more creative, experiment, and improve the company's strategies. It's not surprising, probably, that for support, we're going to connect that back to the Gentelligence principle of strengthening trust. When our members feel supported, it tends to build that trust that we need within the team. As you think about how to build support in your own teams, we think of several key questions that are the best to determine what to do with this and to improve things. So one is, are we willing to share the best ideas with our teammates? Another is, do you feel like we can take risks with this team? And finally, are we able to ask for help when we need it? All of these questions really get to the idea of what it means to create support in any team, but especially in a Gentelligent team. These could be used as a group discussion question for everyone to work together to determine that, which could also help with the category of support, making that structure that we're all looking for, and really help to determine exactly what our team is looking for from each other. And the final piece we'll touch on with the trifecta is significance. And this one is a little counterintuitive when you hear the name, but significance may make you think of some self-important person, but in our context, we're actually thinking of it as something that allows our teammates to each achieve their own goals and to feel motivated in work. Significance represents the purpose people find in their work, allowing for a full and varied range of how individual team members may define this concept for themselves. The most productive teams in research has found that they find opportunities for all members to utilize their complementary talents and share leadership, and that will help build significance. One example that we recount in the book, but I'll touch on a little bit here, was with Michigan Technology University's Open Sustainability Technology Lab. So this organization covers a range of generations. It has traditional industry experts, baby boomer researchers, and then also some millennial interns, and now Gen Z interns, I would assume. When the lab leader described how the group succeeded, he tended to mention that the key was that they were recognizing the unique contribution that each generation brings to the mix. And he had a great story about how this works. So they had a time where some electrical adapter that they had was broken and they needed to order a new one. The leader decided, well, I'll just order it through Amazon, which makes total sense. It's a reasonable strategy. But then one of the older members of the team, who had a lot of industry experience, had worked in this, had a lot of technological experience, he just made the part himself from materials they had lying around. So it's not that either of those strategies are wrong, but it's a great opportunity for that older member of the team to have had the chance to show, I've got the knowledge, here we go, I'll make it right here. And the idea of significance connects really well to the Gentelligence principle of expanding the pie, because many within a team cannot even understand why they want to expand the pie to their collaborators until they see the impact that that partner brings. By showing the significance of each teammate, by creating an opportunity for them to show what they are motivated by, their expertise, we create a team that's more willing to open up and learn from others. So we have 3 key questions that we want to think through when we talk about significance. And the first is, does each of us feel that we add value? And this question is getting at, is there an opportunity for each team member to use their unique strengths and contribute in a meaningful way? The next question is, why do we understand the benefit of working together? Does this team understand why each member is here? Do we see that each member of the team has unique skills, knowledge, experience, can-do attitude that they bring? This is all about trying to understand better what each team member has to offer, and that helps to recognize each individual's significance, as well as for the team to build that collective as well. And finally, the last question is, are each of us given the opportunity to teach as well as learn? If every person has unique skills and unique talents, a really good opportunity for a member to build significance is to give them the opportunity to teach those skills to others within the team. So altogether, these are the 3 pieces of the team trifecta, and that's how we can use them to build stronger, Gentelligent teams. And I'm going to hand it back over to Megan to talk about our next section.
Thank you, Brandon. So we're already getting, it looks like, great questions. So I'm going to make sure that we leave plenty of time for those questions. But wanted to spend just a few minutes talking about what happens when we get this right. So, if we connect the dots and we say, without strategy and without insight, and in our case, we would say without Gentelligent strategies and insight, an age-diverse team can very easily go in the ditch. And so understanding the fact that inherent is, these assumptions, these particular differences in perception and thought that we love, the differences in thought, but we want to make sure that we're leveraging those productively and we're not allowing them to contribute to things like frustration and challenges that we can't overcome. So what happens when we get it right? The same thing that often happens when we get any kind of diversity management and leadership and inclusion right. We're able to attract the best talent. So we're not necessarily talking about just millennial or Gen Z talent here. We're talking about all talent. And, one of the things that we try to very much emphasize in our book is the fact that a lot of the attention on generational differences in the workplace has gone towards younger generations. So, of course, the millennials got a lot of airtime, the most talked about generation that we've ever had. And generational differences are not a new phenomenon, but the millennials really brought that to a whole other level. But we actually know that it's just as important to tap into and leverage the talent of people across all generations and age groups. With our baby boomers set to all be eligible to retire by 2030, they won't all obviously retire. Many hopefully will continue to stay in the workplace for quite a while. And with the pandemic, I think that's definitely true. We stand to lose a lot of organizational wisdom and knowledge. So when we talk about attracting the best talent, think about people who are back in the job search right now. Our organization's thinking about hiring in ways that aren't just looking at younger people, but are recognizing and tapping into the value of the decades of experience of an older workforce as well. So we all want to work in places that are inclusive, and age is no exception to that. Flexibility, right? So there is wisdom in doing things the way that we've always done them when it's tried and true and it works. But there's also, of course, that need to always be able to be adaptable, resilient, look at things from new eyes. We've seen that this year more than we've ever seen that before. And we know that diverse teams tend to result in stronger decision making if we're able to hear all of the voices and make sure all those voices are represented at the table. So I can tell you that our multi-generational author team is a great example of this. I love my team. When I set out to write this book and decided it would be hypocritical to write a book about the power of generational diversity without a generationally diverse author team, I don't think I had any idea how true that was in terms of the need to have different voices, different perspectives, generationally and otherwise. So stronger decision making comes from making sure all voices are invited to speak up and share their best ideas. And then, of course, innovation. And again, we don't want to default that innovation always comes from the young. One of the things we really enjoyed learning more about with the book research was the different kinds of knowledge that I referenced earlier. So while we might see, a younger person knowing the latest tech or the latest app or the latest way to do something, that innovation can only be effective if it's married with some organizational context of what have we tried in the past? Why or why wouldn't this work in our current organizational environment? So innovation is a product of a lot of different kinds of knowledge working together. And then finally, reflection and understanding of whatever your target market is. So of course, if you're selling something, that's an obvious example of target market, but also just thinking about, if you're trying to recruit people from a particular area of expertise, there's people in that area that are of all ages who can be valuable for your team. And so you want to know what different generations value and what matters to them, and make sure that those things are, the foundation for those things is set on your team. So getting this right has an incredibly high return on investment. And the opposite is also true. The getting it wrong has a very significant cost. And so our goal with this philosophy of Gentelligence is to make sure that we get it right. And so we're excited to share these tools and these principles. I'm going to flip now to this last stat, which we think underscores the level and the gravity of the current challenge that is being faced out there. So the idea of a multi-generational workforce is never going to go away. Who those generations are and how old those generations are is always a moving entity. So I did some work recently where I pointed out that millennials, even though the word millennial is often used to refer to any young person, our millennials our oldest ones are 40 this year. They're turning 40. And so they're moving into middle management positions. And so, what it meant to be a millennial 10 or 15 years ago is somewhat different. So we have to really marry this understanding of generation and life and career cycle in order to understand how complex this really can be. And you can see here that overwhelmingly, most organizations agree on its importance, but very few believe that they're actually ready to address the trend. And so that's the problem that we hope our philosophy and our work can solve, is allowing us to look at generational differences as a very important and a very valuable kind of diversity of thought. So what we're going to do now, we're going to quickly just pull up the info on our book. I want to just do a quick overview on the book, and then I would love to get to some of these questions that are coming in. And please ask your questions if you have them, because we're hoping that we can make sure that we have plenty of time for conversation. So as Erin mentioned, our book is coming out. It's coming out in June, but it's available for pre-order now. We do have an entire chapter on building Gentelligent teams, but also talk about in the first part of the book how you understand different generations, the snapshots of different generations. We talk about the roadblocks that can sometimes get in the way of generational effectiveness. We talk about those generational practices that Josephine shared in depth. And then the latter part of the book is all about applying Gentelligence to current workplace challenges. So not just teams, but also leadership. So how do you lead if your team is older than you are? 40% of people report that their boss is younger than they are right now. So we have a significant number of people that are either being led by someone younger than them or leading someone older. And that creates quite a challenge as well. We also talk about creating a Gentelligent culture and how to leverage Gentelligence for effective people strategy and for the future of work. So those are all the different chapters and all the different topics that we had the opportunity to dig into. So we had a really great time with that book research. We got to talk to a lot of professionals, a lot of companies, ended up interviewing a lot of people who are doing great work in this space. So we're excited to be able to get that out into the world and share it with people as well. All right, so I'm going to actually stop sharing now and get back to our main screen. And I think, Erin, if you're ready, we'll go ahead and take some questions.
Absolutely. Excuse me. Like I said, we do have quite a few that have come in, so thank you, and keep those coming. The first one is just an overview. Is there already a generation after Generation Z, Gen Z?
I'll tackle this one. Josephine and Brandon know I'm just going to tackle all of them unless they, just step up and tell me they want to handle it. That's the professor in me. I can't even help it. So you guys know, just jump in whenever you have something you want to add. I'm going to say yes, but with an asterisk next to it. So specifically, prior to the pandemic, the generation after Z was being called tentatively Generation Alpha. Now, of course, when you start naming generations with letters of the alphabet starting with X, you're going to run out pretty quick. So they were circling back around with Generation Alpha or Generation A, which was a nod to specifically this sort of dominant generation, very confident. Now, The Atlantic did a big piece on that prior to the pandemic. And now that the pandemic has obviously become a very significant global formative experience, I anticipate, and I'm seeing right now, a bit of scrambling going on about what does that mean for generational identities. So Gen Z was born starting in 1997. We had already sort of decided we were going to cut Gen Z around 2012. But with the pandemic, that creates one of these situations where you say, okay, that's going to influence every person, but really influence young people whose paths and lives and, schooling and opportunity are going to forever be changed because of what happened. So we tend to define generations based on formative events that happen when they're young. So, all the way up till probably about age 20. So what I anticipate will happen, and you can quote me on this if you want, I might be wrong, but what I think is going to happen is we will probably cut Gen Z about 2015 in terms of a birth year, because we will want to make sure everybody in Gen Z has a active memory of the pandemic. And that's what we did with millennials. We cut millennials in 1996. We wanted to make sure they were old enough at the turn of the millennium and at 9/11 to remember those significant formative events. And that's usually age 4 or 5. So that said, I think we've kind of rethought the end of Gen Z. So the next generation will be defined first and foremost by people who were too young or not born when the pandemic occurred. And so I don't doubt that they will probably, have Generation Alpha might stick, but it usually takes a little while for a generation name to really get traction. I'm crossing my fingers they're not going to be called, Generation COVID or Generation C. I'll do everything I can. I don't have that much power, but I'm going to do everything I can to speak out against that. And instead, hopefully, they'll be defined for what comes after the pandemic.
Perfect. Next question isn't part of the misconception of the tech savvy issue is that although younger generations may have always been immersed in it, there are people in the older generation who invented this same technology.
All right, I have a thought on this, and then I'd love to hear what Brandon and Josephine think of this one. I can see some of the questions in the chat, so I think we're all going to have slightly different takes on this. Yes, and that's why we want to, as Josephine said, resisting assumption is number one in terms of the first thing we have to do. So young people tend to assume older people aren't tech savvy, which is not a smart assumption, right? That can be very ignorant, especially because a lot of my clients say, I've been using technology longer than they've been alive. So why am I looked at as some kind of dinosaur? And that's absolutely true. Our agent for the book pointed that out as well. She said, I want to make sure you talk about this. I hate when people do that to me. So I would say, yes, that's a dangerous assumption. I think what we try to talk about is, for example, I love to think that I'm hip and I've learned to use a ton of tech either myself or because Brandon and Josephine or my current students help me. I think it really does come down to how different generations use it, how pervasive it is, what they use it for. Norms around using it can be substantially different. So it's not that older generations can't use it or they aren't savvy. And yes, in some cases they invented it. It's the fact that our younger generations, as a general rule, we want to be careful not to stereotype. It's not true for all Gen Zs and it's not true for all baby boomers. As a general rule, they tend to use technology constantly, younger generations do, and are always aware of what the next thing is and don't even have to learn to use it. It's very natural to them. Whereas the further away you are, so for example, I learned, I had technology in terms of the internet and the computers emerge when I was, basically junior high and high school, and then into college. It was becoming new technology. And so it's always been part of my career, but not always part of my work or my life. And so I've had to learn, and I think I'm pretty good at it. But that's different than a 2-year-old who just knows how to use an iPad because they've always had one in their hand. So again, we want to be careful about the assumptions and test them to make sure that they're correct. I don't know, Brandon and Josephine, if you have anything you want to add to that.
I would just say, I work in consulting, and I think consulting is one of the best examples of an intergenerational team. I work with people all the time that are from every different generation, and I have learned that I am often not the expert in technology, even though I tend to be sometimes the youngest person there. That's because a lot of them have institutional knowledge of ways that we've done things before, ways to use these tools that I had not even considered. And so I think it's a little bit of a balance that I can bring some new things that I know of. I can bring tools that have not been used before, and maybe that becomes a part of what we've been doing. But there's also a lot of that knowledge that comes from using it for longer than I've been alive, like Megan said, that I appreciate as well. And it is a balancing act of both of us being able to share and contribute things that the other doesn't necessarily know.
Great. Our next question, do you have instruments to assess assumptions, Gentelligence, etc.?
That's a great question. We do have some tools in the book around things like assumptions. So we offer tools, some of which we created. One of them it's called an assumption audit. We also offer some tools that are very popular in other kinds of work. For example, we took some things from cross-cultural intelligence and cross-cultural management about tools we use when we're going to other countries, for example, to work and learning and being trained there. Really about making sure the lens you're using to look at things is tested, right? If one of the examples we give is if you're going to Italy and you are sitting there waiting for someone to bring you your check. Anyone who's gone to Europe or gone to Italy knows you're going to be waiting a while, right? Because while we in the US believe that as soon as you're done eating, a check should be there available for you, that's, quote, the way it works. In other cultures, it's considered rude to give you a check until you ask for it. And so if you view someone else's behavior through your own lens of experience, you might make an incorrect judgment. So that's one of the examples we give. And then we provide actually a step-by-step tool of how to use that same strategy to test generational assumptions. So we have a number of practical tools. We call it our Gentelligence toolkit that Josephine was instrumental in creating. So I want to make sure I give her a chance to talk about that if she wants to. In terms of a Gentelligence assessment, the team is at work on that. So we've been asked that before. I think we want to make sure before we roll something out that we feel that it's been validated and it's strong, but certainly we have an interest in creating some sort of a what's your Gentelligence quotient or a Gentelligence assessment as well. So I don't know, Josephine, if you have examples of other tools that I haven't thought of, or if you think that covers it.
No, I think that covers a big piece of what we think about when we think about assessing intelligence, and we certainly outline a lot of strategies in the book itself. But just wanted to reiterate what Megan said, that this is a question that we get a lot, and obviously assessing your current state is instrumental to actually being able to track your progress over time. So, like Megan said, it is in the works, and we'll certainly let whoever asked this question know whenever this is available.
Great. Next question is more of an interpersonal question, and I think maybe a couple of you could answer this. How do you suggest using Gentelligent principles in family and friend groups?
Yeah, maybe I think I'm the one off mute, so maybe I'll jump in here. When I saw this question in the chat, my mind immediately went to what a great way to try to start having those conversations to adjust your lens. So if you have friends and family from different generations, one of the key things that you want to do and what you can do is actually to have an open and candid conversations about the time where they were brought up, the formative experience that you had. And you can actually start to peel back and understand why they're doing what they're doing and how their actions and behavior maybe are rooted in some of those formative experiences that they had growing up. There's certainly more, but I really think that when you have an opportunity to speak to family members and have even friends that are from different generations, this is a great opportunity for you to start thinking about how to break down the barriers and how for you to overcome the challenges of intergenerational sort of tension and bias. So I think having those open and candid conversations is a great way to start thinking about intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know the best way to shatter any kind of stereotype is through personal connection. So absolutely agree.
Fantastic. One of our attendees just commented, Rob just commented, I used my first PC in 1972 while at Miami. So some history there for sure.
I love that. I love that. I was telling Brandon and Josephine that I saw my first PowerPoint presentation used by a professor in class my senior year at college. So, you know, it was a long time ago, but it doesn't seem that long ago for me. But I like sharing those kinds of things with my students just for perspective.
Absolutely. If anyone else has any great examples, please send those in. We love to hear those for sure. The next question, do you think strengths-based assessments like the Clifton Strengths are the best way to get a team started on Gentelligence work?
Oh my gosh, it's like we loaded the audience. We all love Clifton Strengths. So there's got to be some friend of ours out there who's like, I'm going to throw him this question. Yeah, I would love to actually hear what Brandon and Josephine think. Of course, I'm never going to say that a strengths-based lens is not important. I think it's great for teams in general, regardless of whether they're age diverse or not. But yes, I think that's a great tool. Anything that helps the tool become not only more the team become more self-aware, but also aware of what other people are bringing to the table is great. I think like with any kind of difference, just being aware of the way we're looking at it and just shifting our lens to understand, I like to tell the story of a student I had in class, and I said, how do you guys feel about working in teams? And she said famously, it's now famous because I say it every semester, she said, I wouldn't mind working on teams if people would just do things the right way. And of course, she defined right way as her way. And so I always use that when I talk about teams and say, and of course, the Strengths Finder, Clifton Strengths, is a great way to help people understand that, as I think Brandon mentioned in his part of the presentation, there's not right or wrong, there's just different. And so that's certainly a great tool to help people recognize the different ways that people might be viewing something, for sure. And there are some interesting generational differences in that tool as well. So thank you to whoever. I feel like some friend of ours definitely threw us that friendly question for sure.
Yeah, and I would just add real quick that I think any tool like that is having a conversation and starting that conversation amongst your team is a benefit. Just speaking about, well, I don't think these strengths apply to me. I don't think this title is really what I am represented by. It really opens that avenue to discuss what is important to you and to have that conversation within your team. And I think Gentelligence comes up in that, your generation comes up in that, just like your cultural background would. And without those conversations, I think it's a huge missed opportunity for you to not understand, how something that you say affects a member of your team, or how some way that you act affects a member of your team. And so using a tool like Clifton Strengths or any of those that exist really does change the atmosphere of the team, and to really make sure that you know exactly how you impact others and that they impact you.
Very good. Next one is addressed to Brandon specifically, but I think any one of you could answer it. Brandon's bio mentions his work with goal setting. How do different generations approach goal setting?
This is a very interesting question, and I'll be honest, I have not particularly thought of all of the specifics, but one thing that research has found before is that generations do show significant differences in how they prioritize work ethic, and individuality at work. And so I think that part will show up in how they're doing some tasks. I know one thing that we talk a lot about is, especially within the pandemic, it's become especially difficult to recognize the work-life balance, or work-life integration, as I like to refer to it. And so there are some different norms that have been created that somebody who has kids now may not be online from 9 to 5, and maybe they're sending something later in the day, and that might adjust how you work together. I think that ends up affecting how that goal setting works. But I don't know if Megan or Josephine have any other thoughts that they could add to that.
I think you did great.
Very good. Our next question, do you see common weaknesses among companies that are made up of mostly younger employees?
Oh my. I don't know that I would say weaknesses. I would say, is there an awareness? I don't think I want to put a broad brush on all companies that have, a lot of young employees. The question is there an awareness of what strengths do exist from a generational standpoint versus maybe what they feel like they could use, right? So I think the most straightforward answer would be, is there sort of that experience in that, the wisdom. I don't like using the word wisdom because I think too often it's associated just with older workers, but certainly is there that context, or I think what we refer to in the book as the know why, right? So while there might be a ton of innovation, has that innovation and sort of risk-taking and openness to new ways of doing things, is there a counter or a balance to that that comes from, well, but is this realistic? Or, let me share with you my concerns, or that's great, let's think through practically how we would get that moved forward. And again, I think it's just awareness. I think the only blind spot that I would want to talk about is, are you aware at what level a set of older workers or older teammates might be able to provide something that you don't have, and are you open to balancing out your team with that different kind of knowledge? I think we've seen that quite a bit, a number of age discrimination lawsuits, particularly in tech, where the assumptions we talked about earlier are getting them into legal trouble by them sort of feeling like tech's a young person's game, and then, causing them to run into some issues around even age discrimination around that. So I think just being aware of what you don't have at the table and making sure that you seek out ways to complement the strengths that you do have, generationally or otherwise.
No, I think that's great, Megan. Can I just add a couple thoughts on this one? So I think it's a very good question. And if we actually look at some of the very successful companies and innovations in the past, 20 years and the tech boom, if you think about Facebook, you think about Snapchat, you think maybe about Spotify, you'll actually see that maybe the front runners, sort of Mark Zuckerberg, like very backed up by Sheryl Sandberg, that developed the business strategy. You think about Snapchat, the key advisor was from a different generation than the founders. Spotify, same thing, a very senior co-founder and a somewhat younger, I think even millennial. And then actually you can look at Walmart's board of directors that have representation, I think, from every single generation when we research this. So there's definitely, I think Megan mentioned the know why. Clearly you have some really innovative younger entrepreneur, but that is very often supported, or at least has a key advisor, someone that's from a different generation. So I just wanted to add that, but very good question.
Very good. Well, thank you so much. And I know we have some more questions coming in, but our time has run short, unfortunately. So I just wanted to thank Dr. Gerhardt, Josephine, and Brandon for your participation today. It was just a great presentation. Thank you so much. Our next session, Meeting the Meaning Needs, Educating the Whole Person, K-12 College by Dr. Tammy Schwartz, starts in about 6 minutes at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And again, there are unique URLs for each session, so please refer to your registration confirmation email for the link to this presentation or the next one. And on behalf of Miami University Alumni Association, we thank you for joining us. Love and honor to you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.